Okay, well, so we've been discussing what we in the field refer to as the dysfunction of your family. You guys have been each talking a little bit about some of the ways in which your family has been torn apart. By the trauma caused by your dad's reaction to Marianne and her sexual assault in high school. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to give you a little bit of education about what we refer to as the dysfunctional roles that family members take on in a trauma situation. And so the premise of this is that all families strive to achieve balance. Everybody does their part to pitch in to achieve balance. And when there's an incident or a catalyst or an individual who is continually upsetting the balance within the family, everybody jumps in and plays their part. And those parts kind of become automatic. They become what we refer to as the dysfunctional roles in a dysfunctional family. And so there was a therapist way back in the 70s and 80s. Her name was Sharon Wegshager Cruz, and she came up with these family roles. She kind of thought of, like over a baby's crib, there's a mobile dangling, and from the mobile is all these different clowns and different whatever it might be, and when you hit one of them, they all dangle, and if you were to take one of them off, it would go like this because they're all hanging and balancing it out, and so that's the goal of these roles. These roles are meant to maintain balance within the family system. So what I would like to do is to go over each of these roles, and what I want you to be doing is just kind of be thinking about the roles as I describe them, some of the characteristics of the roles, and asking yourself, which roles kind of apply to you. It's definitely okay to, relate to more than one role at a time, or maybe you were in this role when you're at this stage of your life, and today you're more on this stage or this role. So I just want you to be thinking about that. Is that okay? So, and the other piece is that I just want you to be aware that if these roles really don't apply as I'm describing them, that's okay too. Whatever way you identify with this what I want you to just be doing is saying, can I identify with this? Because one of the most important pieces of healing is to be able to know that you're not alone, and that other people have been through what your family is going through, and maybe not exactly, but there's been enough data and research done with families in which there was a continual catalyst of upset and upsetting the balance, whether it's mental illness, substance abuse, trauma of any kind, and that these roles are very common, and sometimes they help to explain what we're going through and help us put words to that. So first thing I'm going to do is just go through the first role here, and I want everybody, I gave you copies of this, but I want everybody to just take a look at that. So the first person on the list is is what we would refer to as the chemically dependent person, or the person who has the illness. In your situation, your deceased father's inability to cope with his little princess being, I'm sorry, Marianne, but little princess, and I know you can relate to that, being, raped and hurt by another person, and his inability to cope with that, and he had this image, and it was like he took that personally, and it became more about him. And so the whole family starts to revolve around Dad and his emotions and his inability to cope, and these dysfunctional roles start to kick in. So what we can see on the outside is his anger and his rigidity, my way or the highway, his grandiosity, like he was a big shot, and perfectionism, and it was all about an exterior image. But on the inside, we know that he was just covering up a lot of pain, hurt, guilt, feeling responsible, and fear that he was going to fall apart, that the whole family's image was going to be ruined, and he dwindled, and that's why he fell into alcohol. So in the next role we're going to talk about is what is often referred to as the chief enabler. And if you can see that, the chief enabler is the person in the family whose task is to provide responsibility. So that's another thing about these roles, is that each role has a task that helps to achieve that balance. And in this case, the chief enabler typically is either the spouse, Corin, or it could be maybe an oldest child, if the spouse is predisposed, or if the chemically dependent person or the sick person is another sibling in the family, well then the roles might change. But lots of times it's an oldest child or the spouse. And what we're going to see is on the outside, the chief enabler is going to be super responsible, is going to be always trying to make sure that all the bills get paid. They do everything. They in the image you see here, they are carrying, so there's an alcoholic inside the bottle, and the chief enabler is on her knees carrying the bottle. It's like they're carrying the alcoholic, they're carrying the sick person, meanwhile doing all of the tasks. So also on the outside, they'll blame themselves. They'll cover up for the alcoholic or the sick person. They will make excuses for them. They learn how to manipulate the bills and rob Peter to pay Paul is one of the sayings we used to say. And sometimes they feel lonely and sorry for themselves, but lots of times they are just seen as very serious people and just feel powerless to change anything. And so they just see it as their role to maintain the status quo. And the next family member, dysfunctional family role, would be what's called the hero role. Have you heard of that? Yeah, it's kind of common knowledge nowadays, but what I wanted to explain is that the hero in this situation is often, again, the oldest child, but not always. But the hero's task in this family is to provide a sense of pride and distract the focus away from the alcoholism and to maintain the family image. So heroes will often, do very well in school. They will be, the teacher's pet maybe even, or they might be the coach's favorite player. the star athlete, beginning a lot of recognition. And so when people see the name Mulvaney in the paper, it isn't about, the trauma that we've been talking about. It's going to be about, the hero's achievements. And so I can see with the head nods that, Mike, you're relating to that. And so in football, you were the star, you were the, and also in basketball. Okay. So, but we can see on the outside is that the hero works hard for approval, that they have a lot of success, maybe are seen as having special talents and abilities. They're super responsible, very popular. And another thing about heroes is that they often, because of their involvement in all these achievements, they will develop an independent life away from the family through, after school sports or maybe a part-time job or all of the above. But what I want us to do is focus on the inner circle here, and you can see there on the inside, they're feeling, confused because they're doing all of these things, getting all of these accolades on the surface, but on the inside, they still feel inadequate, like they're not doing enough. And it might be from messages from the alcoholic saying, when I was your age, I did it better. You'll never be as good as your old man, that kind of thing. And always living in that person's shadow. And so that, conflicting experiences leaves them confused and maybe even feeling inadequate, like they can't measure up. And so they try harder, they push themselves harder. They might even feel some anger, and they might be, to their friends, they might be complaining and being angry about what's happening at home, but never in front of the family, because one of the key dysfunctional family rules is that we never talk about the dysfunction, we never talk about the alcoholism or the trauma, that no talk rule is kept very in place at all times. And so then I want to move on and talk about the next dysfunctional family role. And it's called the mascot. And if you can see that, I'm just going to show it to everybody. The mascot is the sibling in the family whose main task for this family is to provide humor and fun and so a lot of clowning around. They will often be seen as kind of hyperactive, doing anything for attention. So I'm not sure who it is in the family who's relating to that the most. I see a couple of heads nodding, but so the family mascot is the one who, they never take anything seriously. They are always cracking jokes. They will use their humor to disrupt family tension and arguments, being very uncomfortable with any kind of drama or tension in the family. And so they might even do things to attract attention that is negative attention. They might, drop a plate when there's an argument so that everybody stops what they're doing and helps clean up and things like that. And so they might even take that into their school life and find that the mascot is getting in trouble at school for clowning around, and in my day they would get their name written on the chalkboard or the whiteboard up at the front, or they might be sent to the principal's office for their antics. But the thing about the mascot is on the inside, the mascot is also confused because they've never really been told that it's okay to experience these emotions, and they're having these feelings and seeing this intensity happening. They don't know how to handle that, and so they resort to their number one defense, which is cracking jokes. And they know that everybody likes having them around because they're funny, but nobody takes them seriously because they've never taken anything serious. The other thing about a mascot is that they're lonely and they're afraid and they're just hurting on the inside. And so it's real common for comedians to come from dysfunctional families and use that humor as a cover-up for the pain and hurt and confusion they have coming from that family. And I can see a couple of you are relating, and we've all known some of these comedians who've talked about their family issues in public. And then there's two more, and the fourth one here is what's called the family scapegoat. And the family scapegoat is the child in the family who, well, do you know what a scapegoat is, or scapegoating? So scapegoating is when somebody is kind of targeted and blamed inappropriately for a larger group's problems. And so I believe it comes from a biblical term where you put the sins of the tribe onto the goat and you send them off into the desert to die. So the scapegoat, on the outside, they act kind of defiant and withdrawn. They might get in trouble. They might be kind of hanging out with the bad crowd, very strong ties to their friends, like they don't need anybody but their friends. And the scapegoat is the one in the family, the sibling in the family that's most likely to start experimenting with alcohol and other drugs, or smoking, or other addictive behaviors as a way to escape. And so on the inside, what we're seeing is feelings of rejection from the family. You know, if you ask the other siblings and the parents, whose fault is it that everybody's always yelling at each other, or why dad drinks so much? The scapegoat is the one getting blamed. And so sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, somebody can, have one role when they're younger, but then as they get older, after there's been some trauma or other issues, we can change roles. And so in the case of Marianne, maybe you felt like the princess when you were little and you were treated as such, but then later we see the scapegoating where something that happened to you, a trauma that happened to you, is actually used against you, and feeling rejected, feeling hurt, and lonely. So yeah. And so then lastly we have the lost child. And the lost child, their task is to offer relief for this high drama, intense, dysfunctional family. And why the lost child provides relief is that the lost child is the child in the family that just kind of stays in the background, doesn't really require any extra attention, kind of gets up on their own in the morning and makes their own breakfast and just kind of goes about their business, doesn't create any problems for the family, doesn't create any waves. And, on the outside, they seem to be kind of distant, and aloof, like they're unaffected by what goes on in the family. And they're just quiet all the time, and kind of intellectual or inward. They might be, writing poetry or be into art, different things like that to express themselves. Lost children sometimes will, dress in dark clothes and act kind of sad and quiet and distant. And so people will, kind of assume that the lost child is doing fine because they're not acting out like the other, members in the family. But in truth, the lost child is feeling rejected, very insecure, and lonely. They feel like, does anybody even care if I exist? Would they even notice if I disappeared? And they might even do things to see if anybody notices. And when nobody does, it just kind of, instills in them the belief that this is true, that nobody really cares. Again, the task is to provide relief. And so what I've been talking about is these family roles, and what I want you to just think about is, do any of these roles apply to you? And what we're going to do is go through, after we take a little bit of a break here, and we're each going to talk about the roles that we related to, and I'm also just going to give you an opportunity to ask me any other questions you might have about these roles. I think that's about it. So let's take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and